think we're ready to start, folks.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Okay, Katie. Good morning. Welcome to the December 1st meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and we have established a quorum with all of the committee members present. First order of business are the minutes from November 17th, our last meeting, which have been submitted for everyone to read and review. Do I have any further changes or comments on those?
Accept them as written.
Okay, everybody,
I accept.
Kathy, John, Terry. Terry wrote them. We do have consensus to accept the minutes as they have been submitted. Moving along, we're going to go to our revised policy FI-13, which is redlined. We talked about this at our last meeting. It's on the collection policy. And I want us to review everything again. There were several red line changes to that, but we left it with the suggestion from Lou that Deb put in a chart or a table that would explain this better. In other words, this is what happens after 31 days, after 90 days, after 120, and after 150. And she also referenced which part of the policy it refers to. So let's go back to the very beginning, looking at the changes that have been made. 3.1.2, we took out the words "then generally." It's the association will send a letter or notice. Then we added 3.2.2, what happens if payment has not been made after or within 30 days after the lien letter and notice was sent. And that, again, is referenced in the information in the table. Then 3.2.3, 30 days after the collections proceedings letter was sent, this is what happened. And then we went down to 3.3 and labeled that payments of in-house accounts, and listed how those will be applied, and this is in accordance with Arizona state law. So if someone pays, if they just do a partial payment, it shows how things will be applied in this instance. So then we inserted the chart that refers to everything under 3.1 and 3.2. Then we added 3.4, which are payments of collection agency assigned accounts, and the order in which they will be applied, and that again is in accordance with Arizona state law. And again, payment plans for in-house account, we added any payment plan must allow the account to be paid in full prior to the next assessment date. So those are the changes that have been proposed. We had reviewed all of them last time, but we did add the table into this. So I'd like to go first to Deb and ask her if she has anything she would like to add to this, because she's done the yeoman's work on this.
Karen and I, hello? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Karen and I worked on putting this back together this morning, and I think that the chart got inserted one space later than it should have. So I'll just ask her to move the chart before the 3.3 of where the payments begin, because it's kind of in between the payments in-house and the attorney ones. Other than that, everything is the same.
Thank you very much. We will have Karen make that change on that before it goes to the governing board workshop this week. I know everyone's had a chance to look at this, but let's just go around and see if anybody has any comments. Kathy?
No, I have no comments. Looks
Okay.
good.
John?
No comment.
Terry,
No comment.
Lisa,
No comment.
Harry,
No comments.
Lou.
No comments, but Debbie, great job on the chart, laid out beautifully. Thanks so much, I appreciate that hard work.
Deb did a very nice job. Yes, Pete?
She did. Lou, you had one grammatical on 3.2.3 that if it's 30 in the 3.2.2, why not it be a numerical? Small issue, but just for continuity. So at 3.2.3, do you want it 30 in numerical versus?
Yeah, I like that. So 3.2.3, we'll say 30 days first in integers, and then either way, as long as we're
As-
consistent, we should have integers and then the alpha. So 30 as integers,
Grammatically, I was taught that if you start a sentence with a number, it should be written.
that's fine. Then throughout the document, you should have written numbers and then in parentheses, the integers.
Okay, so 3.2.3 will stay with 30 written out, and then we will put 30 in parentheses following that.
But that has to be throughout. So in 3.2.2, before the integer 30 would be the narrative, the alpha 30.
Okay,
I mean, just so we're consistent through the document. Alpha first, then integer second.
do I have consensus on that one? Okay.
Yes.
We'll make that change, and then it will be ready to, so do I have consensus then for this to go ahead to the governing board workshop, which is making those few grammatical changes?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
I have a small question. It truly is a nit, but in the table, then, and I think this might be a follow-up to what Pete said a few minutes ago, because it's what prompts this question. We have 90 days, 120 days, 150 days, but we have 31 days on the first row. Is that an inconsistency? Should it be 30?
No.
Okay,
After 30 days.
after 30 days. And the other ones take place on 90. Okay, thank.
Okay, thank you for raising that question, so if it gets asked at board workshop, I'm going to know the answer. Okay, so we have consensus to move FI 13 forward to the governing board workshop. I'll get those other changes made on that. Next is our policy FI 17, which you have in front of you. We do have John and Lisa, who have been working on FI 17 with Deb, but what we're bringing forward today is striking section 3.9, which says the governing board may, in its sole discretion and without obligation to do so, consider hardship or other circumstances in any individual situation where the asset preservation would normally apply, and may grant a full or partial refund of the asset preservation fee. So Pete or Deb, which one of you is going to talk about why we're striking this?
Recently, there's been more APF refund requests, and more of them have been rejected. One most recently that was rejected, the gentleman had talked to Pete. I wasn't in the office that day, and said that he had lost $20,000 in the stock market. So, you know, he thought that he was having a hardship because of that and should be able to get his APF back. So we just thought that hardship is not a good reason for people not to have to pay the APF. Or should they be able to ask the board to waive it? So we do have the special hearings for people, but it was consensus of a lot of people in the office that they thought that it was good to take this part out. Because what is really considered a hardship? It's different in everybody's eyes, so.
Have we been seeing a lot of instances where people are using hardship as a reason?
No, but we just don't want to get it to that point. I mean, everybody's hardship is, my thought of what a hardship is compared to Pete's or anybody else's is totally different, so.
Okay. Pete, are you going to? I think Pete's going to enlighten us.
May take me a few seconds to pull this up, but there was discussion with Mr. Hazelwood on this issue, and,
Is your mic on?
yeah.
Okay. Doesn't sound like, you're very soft-spoken, Pete, so.
If you don't mind, let me get 1 minute onto my smartphone to pull up that discussion, that back chatter with Kathy and Mr. Hazelwood.
Okay. Would you like us to move on in the agenda and you'll come back to it?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to put that on hold for just a few minutes and move on to item 3.03, which is the FI12 Subcommittee findings. And I just want to say once again how appreciative I am and everybody in the community should be for Lou and Terry and John for the work they're doing along with Pete on FI12. It's been great, and I don't know who's the spokesman today, but I'm going to leave it up to you guys. So
Thank you, John.
take it away.
Terry, So we've been asked to look at recommendations for the investment of the capital reserve. The subcommittee met with Pete. Bill was there frequently, and we reviewed Sun City West's policy, Sun City Grand's policy, and Sun City's policy. Considerations were that 99% of organizations such as ours are invested in CDs, treasuries, et cetera, et cetera. Subsequent to the review, we came up with the following. Currently, the Sun City policy is no more than 10% in equities and 90% in the following. FDIC-insured investments, insured, backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. Mutual fund and exchange-traded funds, which invest in the following: domestic and international securities, high credit quality investment-grade bonds rated by Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and the Fitch Rating Services. No more than 10% invested in equities. The committee's recommendation is that equity position is prudent and will provide some marginal growth reserves, and as a segment of the market has historically shown growth over time. Should the equity market differ because of a significant downturn with no more than 10% reserve in equity, the downturn will not have a major impact on the reserves of the fully funded balance. Therefore, it is the committee's recommendation the policy of no more than 10% of Sun City Reserve funds be invested in equity should continue. The funds will that currently invest our reserves should remain the same. So we have in our reserves, let me just go back one section here. When we look at our current reserves, we currently have 5 bond funds and we have 3 equity funds. So we're saying that the 3 equity funds, which are Vanguard funds, they're a Vanguard Extended Market Index, Vanguard 500, and a Vanguard Total International Stock Index. So it is the committee's recommendation that we will continue to maintain those 3 funds. The remaining 90% should be invested as follows. Once again, we had a review and we talked with Dave Reber, who is Sun City Grand CFO, and therefore the subcommittee recommends the following. Not greater than 30% of the reserve should be invested in mutual funds and ETFs which invest in domestic and international securities that are of high-quality investment-grade bonds. At the recommendation of the Reserve Investment Subcommittee. So let's just stop there and go to the back page, which is a recommendation of the committee that the FI12 subcommittee recommends that there be a standing Reserve Investment Subcommittee. And that'll meet quarterly with the treasurer, general manager, CFO appointees, and any financial representatives who procure the above to ensure we are in compliance with the policy. Once again, we looked at Sun City, Sun City West, Sun City Grand, and Sun City. Sun City Grand does have a committee that meets quarterly, and their sole purpose is to ensure that they are in compliance with the policy. They also have input as to changing the investment instruments. But once again, if that occurs, it would come to the full BNF committee, would then go to the workshop, and then the approval of the directors. Okay. So when we talk about the Reserve Investment Subcommittee, now you know what that means. Once again, it was the subsequent approval of the governing board should the percentage of the category be less than 30%. The remaining balance invested in other investment instruments as detailed in number 2. So then we say in number 2, all remaining reserves shall be in secure instruments consisting of U.S. government obligations, CDs, money market funds, et cetera. Now, we do want to make one change. I thought when I sent this to Karen, it had draft written all over it. Obviously, this did not. But this is really a draft copy. I don't know whether you can. Does it? Oh, okay. Is that what it is? I don't see any. Oh, there it is. Yeah, okay. So I see it. But John and Terry and I would like to make one change. And John, why don't you take the change? If you turn it to the back and turn it up, you can see
It almost looks like a watermark on the.
Yeah, mine, the one that I sent Karen, I don't know whether you can see this, but mine is, I mean, I wanted people to know that this is a draft. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Lou. When we get into the types of securities for debt, the debt instruments, the way it's written, it would restrict Sun City West to mutual funds or ETFs, which we certainly might want to do. But to provide a little more flexibility, I think our intention was to also include the words "or individual high investment grade bonds." So to provide more flexibility, but still limit our exposure to no more than 30%. So the 30% still holds, but the addition of individual securities would allow us, if we chose, to purchase individual bonds. The difference between a mutual fund and a bond in this particular case is if you're in a fund, you are virtually eliminating credit risk. However, if the mutual fund carries with it some interest rate risk. If you reverse that, the risk switches. So an individual bond, you know you're going to get your money back, especially if you're short term. So it's just an either or. It provides more flexibility. It wouldn't change the decisions that someone would make unless the community absolutely did not want any individual bonds. Sun City Grand does purchase bonds, direct, short term. They mature and get your money. And as long as you're in high grade or investment grade bonds, your credit risk is pretty small. And of course, you could always sell those if there was a downgrade on by one of the rating services. So that's the word individual bonds was left out of our write-up on the draft.
So
And-
how would
And
this-
it would be additional, it would be added in two places. On the percentage of reserves in equities and bonds, the dark bullet that begins mutual funds and exchange-traded funds would also include the word "or individual bonds," and then it would appear toward the bottom of page 1, in paragraph 1 there, where the first, not greater than 30% of reserves should be invested in mutual funds and exchange-traded funds or individual bonds. Those two places would need that addition. It provides flexibility, and it doesn't restrict in any way, and nor, at least in my opinion, substantially increase the risk. It's consistent with the concept of preservation of capital. Is that clear enough, or would you like me to confuse it a little more?
Okay, I understand in number 1 down at the bottom, under the remaining reserves, after you say exchange-traded funds, you would say, or you would insert, or individual bonds.
No, it would say, invest mutual funds, comma, exchange traded funds, ETFs in parentheses, and / or individual bonds.
And/or, okay.
And the same at the top, under percentage of reserves in equity and bonds, second dark bullet, say mutual funds, comma, exchange traded funds, in parentheses, ETFs, and/or individual bonds, which are invested in the following. Correct, John?
So Ann, you and I chatted.
Absolutely correct.
Yes,
It just, it provides more flexibility to the administration
Sure.
without, and it doesn't require or demand anything.
Okay,
Lisa asked if I would repeat it. So we're looking at the section that starts percentage of reserves in equity and bonds. It's the third dark. So the second bullet under that would be mutual funds, comma, exchange traded funds, in parentheses, ETFs, and / or individual bonds. And that same narrative would carry down to number 1 below, would say not greater than 30% of reserves should be invested in mutual funds, comma, exchange traded funds, in parentheses, ETFs, comma, or no comma, and / or individual bonds. So it gives the CFO, general manager, that flexibility. And as John indicated, it really still has preservation of funds as our number 1 consideration.
To add on with, just in case people are following this and they're not confused, the key element in that whole narrative is the 30% restriction. What that does is it restricts our investment policies to not be too much in non-U.S. government-backed securities or extremely short-term. So that's where the risk would be. The risk on a 90-day CD or a money market fund is extremely small. So we wanted to minimize where people are going out in time in any way. So the 30% there is really the important part of that statement.
And if I may, so when we look at our capital reserve investments, we have 10% in equities, 30%, up to 10% in equities, up to 30% in bonds, and the remaining 60% are in government-backed securities. So if, in fact, this policy occurs, I think I'll do a little table that says 10%,
mind.
30%, 60%. And it just gives a snapshot. You look at 100% of your reserves, we know which categories, which investment categories these our reserves are invested in.
Thank you.
One additional comment is, there is still nothing that would restrict the CFO from placing 100% of the funds in very short-term government-backed securities. We're merely putting limits on how much can go into any investment that has more risk than the U.S. government. But we're not telling them they have to.
Now, as I'm reading this, though, you said that the CFO would have that authority, but down here you're also suggesting a standing reserve investment committee that, just to ensure compliance, not to make the choices.
Correct.
Okay.
Ann, would you say that again?
I was asking if, his comment was that the CFO could go 100% into other things and get totally out of equities if they
Correct.
wanted to. And I said, you're saying then that the CFO can make any of these choices as long as it stays in the policy. It doesn't go through the investment subcommittee to be done.
No, I think the subcommittee is key. right,
That's what I'm asking, because that's not what I heard John say.
Well, the CFO, when meeting with the Reserve Investment Committee, can make recommendations, but nothing can be changed unless the reserve investment, and maybe we need to word that all changes in investment policy will have the following flow. It would go to the Reserve Investment Subcommittee, then to BNF, then to the governing board, either through the workshop.
Okay.
So that's a good catch. I think that should be in this document.
Is that what you're,
Well,
is that what you were saying, John?
I agree with Lou. It's a good catch. It's something we did not discuss at length, or else obviously it would be spelled out with
Okay.
some kind of statement. But I'd like to get, I'd like to ask Pete to weigh in on his thoughts on that.
Yeah, two things. This is probably going to disappoint, the subcommittee guys, but just a reminder, this top part is directly from the bylaws. And I see a lot of board members around here, so help me out here. I don't know enough about bylaw changes.
Would you
But
would you specify the top part you're referring to?
The
Which
percentage
part?
of reserves in equity and bonds, this comes directly out of the bylaws, 5.05. And you will note that generally speaking, or directly speaking, it does not allow for individual investment instruments. It goes strictly to mutual funds. And so they're proposing to change that. I just look around the room, there's a lot of governing board people here, especially some of the discussion about recent changes of the bylaws. What does it take to make such a verbiage change? Because I'm not very well read on the method of making such a move. Certainly not necessarily out of a subcommittee, but help me out, anybody here?
Well, that would be a policy change, so you'd have to,
Well, this is a bylaw change. And yeah, the policies are down below. That was some discussion about some very well thoughts about making some things a little more concrete. I'm going to get back to that in a second, Ann, but I do not want to kind of go too far down this road before we make sure we understand we're talking about a bylaw change up there. And I'm certain that comes with different covenants than just, a recommendation.
So for clarity purposes then, Pete, what I'm hearing you say is that as written now, this draft is in compliance with the bylaws because it states mutual funds and
Correct.
ETFs.
That's exactly right.
So if we leave this as is, we're in compliance. There's no need to
Correct.
make any changes or even consider any changes with the
Correct.
bylaw.
Yep.
If we were to insert the
Yes.
discussions that I brought up about bonds,
I-
that might walk us down the road. Depending more research, it might put us in a position of a bylaw change
Absolutely
to
correct, yeah.
resolve that conflict.
Yep.
Am I understanding it correctly?
100% correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So what you're telling us, Pete, is that the comments we were adding earlier and/or individual bonds.
Would be in conflict with our
It's going to
bylaws.
put us out of compliance with our bylaws.
Yes.
And does everybody realize what a bylaw change entails? That's a vote of our association members. Has to go to a full vote. Am I not correct, Mr. President?
Because, hold on. Yeah, because this would affect owner members' values and rights, it would have to be put on the ballot, and would have to be a vote of 51% of the people in the affirmative that show up to vote.
And I would argue, for all the reasons you bring up, that that's an angle that is probably a little bit unnecessary, in my opinion. We've been invested in mutual funds through Vanguard for 5+ years. Individual instruments is what Grand does, but we don't have to follow them, to the absolute T. And so I quite bluntly would argue that there's a lot of ease in production for the accountants, that comes out of these funds, and 2 to 3 to 4 hours, as Mr. Reber does over at Sun City Grand. It's not that I'm opposed to that, but we don't have to follow them in that strict of manner. And for all the things that George just mentioned, I certainly don't think that's of great enough value.
Well, we don't have to follow Grand, we do have to follow our bylaws. So,
Correct. And that's the difference, and that's where I
Does-
was going to go next, is the question about these lanes and CFO responsibility. And I'll maybe interject that right now, because it could influence you guys' decision. Grand has these same lanes. They had 6 different instruments. This subcommittee decided to avert 2 of them. Just they were not consistent with the type of risk policy that we wanted to maintain, particularly like commercial paper and things like that. So this subcommittee came up with the 4 instruments that they would allow for preservation of capital principles being primary. But when you talk to Grand, they've defined their lanes that we're doing here. Those are not arbitrarily changed by any means by the CFO. They absolutely go back to that investment committee, and they propose any alterations to those lanes, and they work their way up to the governing board. So I'm sorry, John, I had no intention of ever being in my office and making a change like that without the advisement of the committee and the board approval, so.
Well, it sounds to me like we need to make a choice here. If we are going to leave in that suggestion of adding and/or individual bonds and send that to the workshop, which then is going to trigger a possible bylaw change, or do we want to just strike it now? So,
I would recommend we strike it. I see a very small possible gain by having it in there in terms of flexibility, and I see a very large cost to that. And just in balancing the cost-benefit trade-off, I don't think the benefit justifies
no.
what we'd be doing. That's my opinion. That's all it is. I'd like to hear from Lou and Terry, but my opinion would be it's not worth it.
I agree with John. Just leave it as it was with bond funds. It doesn't, like you said, it doesn't go against bylaws, so just leave it alone.
And Lou?
Yeah, if you bring up 5.5.3.2, that's really, when we wrote this document, we copied that verbatim. So I'm in agreement with John. All along, I personally preferred funds as opposed to individual bonds, because it takes an onus off of the CFO. And now, if in fact this reserve investment subcommittee is created, it really minimizes their I hate to use the word risk, but You know, you're not into individual bonds, and that's what Grant does. I mean, they look at individual bonds and creditworthiness, and I don't know whether we want to get in that deep, so leave it as it is.
Kathy, you agree? Harry? Lisa?
I agree.
Okay. Well, we will leave the document as it was first presented.
Madam
wanna-
Chair, there
what's
will
that?
be one change, if you will. In the the third to the last paragraph, after or in compliance with this policy, no changes in investments can occur without the approval of the Reserve Investment Subcommittee.
Where are
So,
you?
so this is the third to the last paragraph, which says, lastly, the
Okay.
FY12 Subcommittee recommends that there will be a standing Reserve Investment Subcommittee. The next sentence after, or in compliance with this policy, no changes in investment or investment changes can occur without the approval of the Reserve Investment Subcommittee, BNF Committee, and the
Governing board?
Governing Board.
Okay, would you read that, please? No changes
Well,
or?
I guess, no changes in investment can occur without the approval, I'm writing it myself, of the Reserve Investment Committee, BNF Committee, and the Governing Board. Is that too limiting?
I think that'll open up, to answer your question, no, I don't think it is, but I'd love to see what others think. But the next sentence goes hand in hand with what you just said. I think we need to look at that
Well,
together, because the next one talks specifically about changes.
yeah, so I guess we actually did look at that.
Madam Treasurer?
Yes.
I would suggest that we get this redone and a clean copy for review at our next meeting, since we're a fortunate committee to have two committee meetings a month. This way, we're not all looking at different words that we've typed in there. Let's get it straight.
I would agree. This
Thank
does
you.
not have to go to the governing board workshop this week. We can certainly put this off for the governing board to address in January.
So you're suggesting, which is where I think I was going to go, separate the two.
Yes,
So you had the policy, or the investment part, the 90, the
Yes.
10, and then hold back on the Reserve Investment Committee until we have a little more fine tuning on that.
Okay,
Because
so
I
we're,
think it would be important to have some, perhaps, guidelines for the Reserve Investment Committee.
yes. One thing that is not addressed here, I may be getting way off topic with this, but we had been discussing in a prior meeting about having a financial advisor and doing RFP or RFQ for financial advisors. Is that off the board?
it is, because
Okay,
for two reasons. Number one, there's a cost involved, but that's insignificant. Number two is Vanguard provides that service. And Pete, you want to pick up on that, because we did talk about that.
Sorry, Lou, I'm going to have to disagree. Okay. So let's define financial advisor and financial, yeah, well, for Sun City Grand, they elicit all of their financial production through Wells Fargo, and they've RFQ'd qualifications for them so as to make these hundreds of separate documents be in a workable fashion such that the accounting can deal with it at the end of the month. There's a financial advisor that's been bandied about over here, but they don't have such a person over there in the context of where we're going with it. When we're going with funds, as defined by these lanes, I don't need anybody to tell me differently. That's what we've been dealing with for the last 5 years with the 60/40. They're not advising. They're simply complying with the directive of the governing board. And so since we're going to be so restrictive on the investment committee creating these lanes, I swing more towards the qualifications of what kind of current company would deal with that the best for us. JP Morgan / Chase, Wells Fargo, B of A, whatever. And so these guys, the subcommittee, have done a great job of creating the lanes. My argument would be next, avoiding this financial advisor, but more towards a whatever investment, I can't come up with the right word, but essentially they do the production for our accounting for these, and then they stay within these lanes, and they do all the current things that Vanguard does. So that's my only concern, Lou, what you were saying is Vanguard is, in the current state, as a brokerage company.
Right.
They're going to maintain that 10% equities unless their fees were so, exorbitant as compared to what we could get from somebody else maintaining those equity funds. But this remaining 90% just needs to be RFQ'd for who can provide that bandwidth for all the multiple amounts of CDs that we will likely want to procure to stay within FDIC. Can they do all the treasuries and the corporate bonds and things like that? Some back chatter that I've had with all of them are, more than capable of doing that. But we would have to RFQ the Vanguard component out of there. That's a brokerage side. But they do have, of course, they're a $6.4 trillion company. They are very capable of managing all these other instruments. They just would have to be RFQ'd. That's my envisionment of where we want to go next.
Okay, so the subcommittee will develop an
Yes.
RFQ?
Yes.
Is that
And
what
that's
you'd
where
like?
we were kind of going with it, but, and you made astute that we didn't really address that next phase.
Well, we have a straw man RFQ, right? I did that, and so we can meet, and so as I look at the policy, the investment side of it, we're pretty solid with. Everybody's in agreement with that. So the next phase would be the Reserve Investment Committee, if the BNF and governing board agree that, or I guess you can actually create a subcommittee, correct, Dan? For a reserve investment subcommittee.
Yes,
Okay.
we have that now.
We do.
Isn't that what you all, you're an FI12, I guess.
Yes, so I'm saying we're going to morph from FI12 subcommittee to the next, and if, I mean, I don't necessarily have to be on that subcommittee. John, I really don't, but anyway, maybe we should put some meat on the bone.
Well, the way I would see it is if we have a reserve investment subcommittee, the first thing we're going to do is just explore if this is where we're going to go with this. This is going to mean we're going to have to rewrite parts of FI12 to incorporate a permanent subcommittee, because that's what it would take.
That's correct.
And we have to realize, too, if we're going to have professional guidance, which I'm using the word guidance instead of a financial advisor, there will be fees involved. We don't get JP Morgan, Chase, any of those guys. There's going to be some fees.
I think we've discussed this, and they can, as in your own personal world, you may call, I'll use myself as an example. I may call Wells Fargo and talk to an investment advisor and say, I have, $1 available. What do you have in Arizona tax-free bonds? And they'll provide you that information. When you purchase those bonds, in my particular case, or there's no bonds out there, maybe you want to go with the fund and here's some funds. There's no fees involved there. And I think that's the road I'm going down. If there's a reserve investment subcommittee and there is a representative from company X, we say to them, we want to move X number of dollars from A to B, there's no fee at that point. So if we create ladders, so Pete talked about lanes, and I don't want to drill down too far, but let's just look at $100 over 5 years. And we say we're going to invest, our ladders are 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So you have $20 invested in year one. In year 6, year 1 is now mature, and you're going to invest it. I don't know if we want, and this is something the subcommittee has to come up with. My thought is, you know, this, if you're looking at money markets or CDs, and, you know, you're dealing with company X, you know, what do you have out there? Now, Terry is more learned in this than I am, but there's just companies out there, and that's what they do. So you have, you know, $20 in year 6, and you call up the company and say, you know, what's the best you got? Terry, maybe you can speak to that.
Again, we were speaking of especially the lanes, and when you get into FDIC insured investments. Let's talk about the CDs. You can buy a $250,000 CD, or what they do buy is $249,000 CD to cover the interest. And you can buy them anywhere from 90 days to as many years as you want. These banks will sell them, and they're happy to sell them to you for free, okay? And they'll send you the list, here's the maturity dates, and okay, you got the Bank of Nebraska, it's 1 year and it's coming due. You want to roll it into another one, so on and so on. You can do all that for basically free. So as Lou had indicated, there's a negotiation part of that, because again, when a bank does that, and they, let's say we buy $10 million worth, the bank will do it reciprocating, meaning they bring in $10 million of deposits. They sold your 10, and those other banks buy Wells Fargo's 10. Okay, so the bank just brought in $10 million of deposits. And if you ever worked in the business, they're either chasing loans or they're chasing deposits. And usually, now probably not, but they're chasing deposits most of the time. And they're just tickled to death to get your business. So they're gonna do it for free. They're happy to do it. And again, on the fee side, you have Vanguard, who is very fee structured, okay? So they handle your thing and it's $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, whatever the amount is of the fee. Wells Fargo, like Grand uses, they don't charge a fee, but you get a haircut on the rate of the bond,
return.
okay? Now, how they manage a fund, or do you stay with Vanguard, who knows? But they buy individual instruments. So they buy a $1 million treasury bill, it's got a 3% coupon on it, and they sell it to you for 2.9, and they take 10 basis points. So it all works out eventually. So these guys aren't in business not to make money, obviously. So that's how it works. So we can
Some kind of
negotiate.
fee, but you're not going to see a bill for this is your
Exactly.
fee.
Yeah.
Right, so,
Yeah.
so that would be the Reserve Investment Subcommittee's responsibility to have these folks come in, and maybe you have more than one company come in. You're not restricted, right? When we talk about the subcommittee and we talk about financial representatives, right? You might bring in Wells and J.P. Morgan Chase or whoever you bring in. And this subcommittee meets quarterly and you say, you know, we have $10 million coming up, you know, on our ladder. And once again, that ladder may change in a more secure investment or secure environment. You may go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Today, you might go 30, 60, 90 days. So that's, once again, the subcommittee's role. The only issue I have is the time element. the subcommittee meets, so now we're meeting quarterly, so by the time it gets to the governing board, that's no longer available. So we have to fine tune this. But once again, if we get the green light on a reserve investment subcommittee, Madam Chair, then I think we then go in and we start nailing down, we talk about meat on the bone on this reserve committee to say, this is their role, this is the time element, there should be a flow chart to say this is, so everybody looks at it and goes, we go from A to Z, and this is the path we take. I'm done.
Well, one thing that we're kind of in disagreement with here then are, your next to last paragraph was, any changes in the securities, funds, or investment must be approved by general manager, CFO, and treasurer. But then you wanted to say, no changes in investments can occur without the approval of the Reserve Investment Committee, the Budget and Finance, and the governing board.
Well,
That's going to restrict us.
yes, but I think, to be clearer on that, I think we need to talk about percentage of equities, percentage of bonds. That's what has to be approved by the governing board. And once again, we need to put, and that's a very good point, because there is there's a conflict there. I think really what we want the governing board to approve is to say, we don't want 10% in equities anymore. We want, or the recommendation of the reserve to the BNF, to the governing board, is we now recommend, because of the financial climate, that we should only have 5% in equities. And they come back and they say, fine, that's fine. We may also come back and say, we really think instead of 30% in bonds, we'd like to go down to 10% in bonds and the rest in government securities. So I will fine tune that to say, this is when the governing board's we're going to request approval from the governing board, because it's a change in the policy. However, within the policy, because we need to have some better timeframes, I think the last sentence is key, or the second to the last paragraph is key. Changes in the securities themselves. We want to move out of this bond fund into this bond fund, is approved by the Reserve Committee, the General Manager, CFO, and the Treasurer.
Because right now, if Vanguard wants to make changes, they can do it. None of us, have to look at what they're changing if they're moving money around in different funds.
I don't think so. I think we're locked into the funds, are we not, Pete?
To be clear, I'm understanding, and they don't just make changes at any unprescribed time. They follow our, what currently is Schedule B, and we refined that after the board approved the 10% capacity. We redid that. You and I
Right.
signed
but
that.
They've got their parameters
Yes,
for the
right, for the equities.
percentages. But the board or the BNF is not telling them which funds to put these in.
Correct.
Correct. Okay.
Okay,
Well,
so,
yes and no. I mean,
I mean,
there
if
are
they-
government.
If they say we want to, right now you're in this mutual fund A, and we think you'd be better off in mutual fund C. That doesn't have to come through this group. Can they do that if it's meeting?
No.
They can't do
Not-
that?
No.
Okay.
And what
Just a
speaks-
reminder
what
of-
speaks to
yeah.
the no? Why
The current policies are
Says-
very restrictive. They have to be in index funds, no more than 20%,
Okay, but if.
all of
but if-
those caveats.
But if A and C both meet those criteria, and they want to change for some reason, they don't have to call us, do they?
Well, I'll have to check on that. Let me just
But that's
absolutely
not
check on that.
normally-
It's
if
been a
that-
stable 3 funds in the equities for as long as I've been here, in the same 6 or 7 bond funds. are all, have their various near, intermediate, and long-term to diversify. I'll have to check with them, but they're not usually just, shifting those around.
I understand that, but I have not seen anything in a policy that prohibits them from doing that if it meets the criteria that we
Correct,
have
but-
given them. And so
Do you want
that's-
that in the policy, Ann?
Well, not necessarily. I'm just saying, it's not now. So
Correct.
do we want to get that restrictive on someone? I don't know, I'm just raising a question here.
I think it has to be part of the Reserve Investment Committee.
But,
Well,
I
I'll
think that's
triple
something
check
for-
on this, but,
I think that would
I
be
don't
something for the
think they-
Reserve Investment Committee to discuss. Let's weigh in with, anybody else have something to add on this? Kathy, you look like you've got a
Yeah,
thought.
I don't want to lose the flexibility and the timing, so I think efficiency and quickness is important in
Me
this.
too.
And I feel like that would potentially slip away, so just a couple thoughts. One, would we be better to have a reserve investment advisory committee? And then you bring together a certain set of folks, and we have a set of eyes on the decisions, which helps. The second piece that bothers me just a little bit is I would not want a reserve investment committee to alone, I guess, just, for example, we're invested in Vanguard, and when I heard that, I thought, well, why all Vanguard? Why aren't we mixing that up a little bit? So, but I don't want an investment committee to be able to just make that decision alone. So I think the right people need to be in the room to do that, and that might be where, quote, there's a advisor of some kind. So I would, let's see if I can wrap this up a little bit in my thoughts. One, I think the policy changes, the 90%, the 10% we've decided is good, okay? I think the Reserve Investment Committee needs to go back.
Advisory committee?
Well, I think.
I like that
right.
wording.
I like the advisory, but I think it needs to go back to the drawing board and really flush out what are we trying to accomplish here? Because I don't think we want to lose efficiency and quickness. I don't think anybody does. So that would be my thought.
well,
I appreciate those comments, because I think adding that word advisory is key there, and I do think this needs some refinement. I'm going to go to others who aren't on the subcommittee before I get back to the subcommittee members. So Lisa, what do you have to add on this?
Well, I think it's, first off, I'd like to really investigate the financial advisor role here, and I think that's something we really need to go back to the drawing board on. I'd like to see that happen.
And along with that, are you suggesting pursuing the idea of an RFP or RFQ?
I am, yes. I think somewhere along the way, I was under the impression that we were continuing on that path and that we were going to see that happen. And I thought maybe I had missed something, and then it seemed, I don't know if the ball got dropped or if we just decided not to do that, and I thought, did I miss something?
Well, that's what I was
And I was
wondering
thinking,
earlier.
what happened? But then when you brought that up, I thought, okay, well, maybe we're going to get back on track here. So I would like to see that, maybe if we get the RFQ and go forward with that. And I don't know, and I don't want to throw you guys, because you guys have done such an outstanding job, and I don't want to throw you under the bus and say, could you continue on this path? Because you guys have done such a great job, and I think that you are the three to continue maybe on this committee with this. But I feel like I'm getting daggers from John.
Quite the contrary, but
Well, I'll just make a comment here. I think with a Reserve Investment Advisory Committee is a good wording change. because we may not always have the Lou's and the John and the Terrys on the Budget and Finance Committee. So I feel very solid with the three of them for sure, no question about that. But, you know, roll forward 5 years, you may not have that same talent here. So I think the advisory is a good way to go.
Harry?
Agree.
The advisory aspect of it. I mean, when you got your committee, that should be helping Pete and Bill to give advice. And I mean, that's what it's about.
I agree. Lou, you want to weigh in anything right now?
Yeah, I say the subcommittee meets, we put together a reserve investment advisory document, which lays everything out, okay? So we have a lot of ideas now. I think I have the flavor of direction. I think John and Terry would agree. All we could do is meet with Karen and get another date set up. And we'll throw some, we'll throw some things together and bring it back to the committee and move forward on it. I mean, it's, right now, I think Pete would agree, and I think Bill would agree that the way we're invested, we're not at any risk, we're moving forward, we just want to fine tune it. Is that what we're saying, right? We just want to fine tune it. We can save some money and not have an investment advisor, but have the Reserve Investment Advisory Committee meet with these different people, as Terry indicated. We may be able to save a couple bucks, you know? So my thoughts are, subcommittee meets, put a little meat on the bone and bring it back.
Okay. Terry?
No, I agree with Lou. Again, when you look at your bylaw, Article 5, 5.5.3.1, it says the treasurer shall ensure that a professional investment advisor manages the investment portfolio, period. And again, just so you guys know what happened in the subcommittee, we kind of bounced back and forth. One was to establish the lanes, which I think we've done. Now we're talking about an advisory committee, and we do need a professional investment advisor based on the bylaw. Unless you want to do a bylaw change, which we just said, ooh, we don't want to do that. So we just have to keep going down the path, and we can get an RFP, and we can put the little document together on where we're going with the advisory committee, and just come back to this committee with some recommendations.
John?
I'm in absolute agreement with just everything that's been said, because all the comments are kind of pointing in the same direction. And it goes back to the conversation Kathy opened up about 10 minutes ago. The lanes, that part of it seems to be pretty solid, but the concept of this advisor, the relationship with the bylaws, all of that, I think is immature at this point. Our thinking is immature, and we need to have a rich dialogue where we have a free exchange of ideas, and that's what will produce something that would be good. And what we have right now is not ready for prime time. With that said, since I'm the last person on the committee here to speak, I would like to ask the committee if we could focus our discussion on the first part of this, the part that we think we're pretty comfortable with, the lanes, and the 90, 10, the 30, and see if there's some things that we should use to embellish what we have and polish that up, because I think we can make sure that we're solid there. And then the subcommittee would be very focused in our future discussions on the advisory committee. I think the roles, the whole concept there needs a little work and refinement. And if we could just focus on that, if we knew we had the first part settled, I think it would be helpful to us. Do we have endorsement on the top half of this.
So you're talking about the part that goes,
The no more than 10%, yeah, and down.
and then the
Yeah.
remaining 90%?
Yeah, and then the 30% restriction. Is that solid enough that we don't need to work on that anymore? And that's what I would like. That would help us with our mission at the next meeting. But everything that's been said is all good.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. And my thoughts would be that we will continue to keep this as an FI-12 subcommittee only because eventually, if we move forward with an reserve advisory subcommittee, did I get all those words in there? Reserve Investment Advisory Subcommittee, that will require that we make some changes in FI-12. So we will be moving toward that anyway, so it's just as easy to leave it as an FI-12 subcommittee for right now. But, and I think that we do have very good information, as John said, in the first 90% of this document. And I don't know that anything else needs to be done on that, although I will discuss this with the workshop, and I hope one of you will be at the workshop on Friday. And I'm letting you guys do your finger pointing and figuring out who this is.
Terry, it'd be good to have you there.
But before I move forward with this, I've got several board members here, and I'd like to know if any of them have any questions they'd like to interject right now.
You know very well that I do, but
I would expect nothing less than from our president.
And Madam Chairman, thank you. Thank you, committee, for all the hard work you do with this. One of the things that has come up with this investment thing, and I want to put it back in your thought process, is that we had a legal advice from our attorney that said we should not be invested in anything else but certain safe investments, and that was out there. The other thing is that he gives us the opportunity to also look at ourselves as not investors or anything else, but we fall under the idea of what a trustee would be. And Terry, I know you're in the banking industry. When you go back to the subcommittee, you can kind of give them an idea of what that parameter is, much more than I would be able to do in that situation. That's two of the parts there. One of the other things is that we've been down a road of subcommittees, investment subcommittees, and all that well before all of us were around. The last round was at Best Poor. The one before that, basically, we lost our shirts on. And so I would caution the ideas that we put into this are wonderful, but the idea is that we're not going to be here in perpetuity. What we have to set into motion right now is the building blocks to make sure it will go forward without interpretation. And that's the hardest thing that you guys really have to look at. But again, I'll just reiterate, our legal advisor told us we shouldn't be this. He also told us we should have a financial advisor. And that is it, because that protects our fiduciary responsibility and our ability as trustees of this not this product, of the dollars that are here. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, President George. And of course, the professional advisor goes along with our bylaws 5.5.3.1. So that's non-negotiable unless we want to go to our members. And I can't imagine that we would get consensus among our owner members to not have a professional advisor for the amount of money that we're discussing. So other board members, Donna Maloney? Do you have any, nothing? Sharon Heddick?
I just had a question. I understood from when Pete and Bill were at our meeting that they only do what we ask them to do. So when they're on a committee, then are they allowed to participate in what their opinion is? Or are they still in that mode of, I'm only going to do what you explain and you're going to do? Because that's kind of the impression I got when you were talking to us before.
Well, my thoughts on this are there are three separate questions. The first is you've already had, current policy has the restrictions and the guidance within the policies approved by the governing board. A recent change on that took it to a 10%. For the equities, it remained in the 90%. And so talking about that for a second, that one angle is how do you define the lanes? And I think the three of these guys have identified using the Sun City Grand model is to define those lanes and affix caps on that, if you will, similar to exist already in FI12 for the Vanguard funds. You know, indexing, no more than 20%, FDIC, all those remain in play. We will maybe be needing to look at making any edits to that. So that's one big component of it from my vantage point. The second one that we've been just on the edge of it was what are the restrictions about changing that and guiding that? Grand doesn't alter their percentages at some kind of whim in the CFO's office. Doesn't happen. Those lanes are established, and while they do pursue individual instruments, and the financial advisor will give recommendation to the CFO on a particular corporate bond, for example, or a laddering or things like that. He doesn't act on those at all without the guidance and the presentation of those options, but he doesn't act on any of them without the investment committee approving it. It's not just some CFO in a dark room, you know, making these decisions. It doesn't happen. So they stay in those bandwidths. And I guess item number 3 is maybe not part of policy, but I really would rely on the strength of the subcommittee's experience in this realm is to RFQ the production of all these investments. That to me is, from this chair, one of the most important components of this is to draw upon these guys for how do I manage very simple funds would be easy. And I think we discussed that earlier today will make the accounting realm quite simplified versus doing the grand model of moving in and out of that. But an RFQ is kind of critical to me is to deploy these guys on how do we, you know, manage the reporting on this. And I don't know if it belongs in policy per se, but I would desperately ask them for their guidance. We in accounting can't be just picking some, I mean, I guess I could, but I don't have as much experience in these as these gentlemen in that realm for the production side. So those 3 banks of responsibility in my mind are what we need to solidify. The first one I think John alluded to is the bandwidth, the lanes have been established. And if you need to act on them or feel compelled to act on them today, then move that forward, great. I prefer to kind of do it all as once as these gentlemen, because quadrant number 2 says, what's the role of the standing committee regarding investment changes? And they still have their lanes, but if they, I think one of them alluded to, want to make a recommendation to the BNF, and that's their role, is to say the financial, the RFQ that we choose, let's just pick one, you know, if it's a JP Morgan, that person gives advisement to the committee that I recommend an alteration. They consider it, and this is kind of a slow-moving train, the way we're moving into these investments. None of them are going to be so, you know, volatile in the return that it can't wait, you know, for guidance from a committee. They're all in very narrow bandwidth, and that's the biggest thing that's been altered through all this, in my opinion. And also, we've been paying blank amount of fees annually for that, and really not, I respect Vanguard to the end of the world, but they're not doing anything for those fees. They're managing it. And so the committee has been exploring what the impact is on the fees component. And I just think we're kind of drifting off on a whole lot of different things, but really we're asking, give us the lanes, give us the mechanism for RFQ so the accounting can manage it well, and how would you alter those percentages? And I don't write the rules, but I believe the subcommittee of, as many people you want, then you ultimately, as VNF, will make that choice for recommending it. And I may be wrong in this next statement, but I want to know even if the governing board themselves wanted to alter it, ultimately the decision makers. So would they be able, are they reliant on VNF for the changes, or can they make alterations on their own? So there's a lot, Grand doesn't do that. The governing board gave them the lanes. They let the committee manage it and assure the validity. There's no movement away from their mandates. That's their role. And quite bluntly, they rarely change their percentages. So I think there's this perception that we're going to be moving in and out of percentages with fervor, and I just don't think that's the way we're envisioning it.
I appreciate all that input. I was hoping you were going to answer Sharon's question. Sharon, did you get your question answered?
I still am asking the same thing. Is it mine, Bill?
Thank you, Sharon. We are, as staff, part of the process when it comes to helping to develop policies. So yes, we are involved. It is like watching sausage get made at times. But here we are. But eventually, the policy then gets brought forward to a governing board committee, then to the governing board for approval, and then the procedures on how that gets operated falls back onto us. So in essence, that's how we do what we are told to do. But in the development of the policy, we are involved.
Okay. Does that, okay. Sue, do you have anything to add?
Well, I do have one question. If we're supposed to be following our bylaws and 5.5.3.1, who right now is the professional investment advisor that's managing our portfolio?
See, that's the description part that you can take two angles on it. There's either a financial advisor managing the portfolio as defined or giving advice. And right now, the advice is muted by our policy. So, we can't change from the lanes even if we wanted to. So they become more the adherence to the current policy. And that's what I was kind of saying. There are some subsectors that are currently defined for our 90-10, no more than 20% index funds. That would have to be looked at to see if there's a definement of that policy at the policy level, or do you let the investment strategy take all these lanes and define them, and any decision on near term or 10-year, we as a the subcommittee kind of decided not to put that restrictive language in there. Let the subcommittee define the tenure and the duration of these investments and just follow the policy, and that it doesn't become restrictive within policy if they want to do a laddering, if they want to do 3-year bonds versus, you don't want to put all that into policy because then you're restricting it, the short and near term. I think that's what I heard the subcommittee saying.
Sue, did you get your question? I don't think you got your question answered, though, did you?
Well, no.
She did not, but if I may, as part of I'm taking notes as we go here, I think we need to define a 5.5.3.1 professional investment advisor. So, as things flow, you have bylaws, you have your policy, then you have procedures. So within the procedures, I think with Bill and Pete and the three of us, we will define professional investment advisor, their role. And it could be that they just sit at a table and nod yes or no, or provide us with the available instruments that we could purchase.
But the professional advisor is to manage.
Now, I know, I see that.
Based on the criteria set forth by the policy.
I see that.
So we're giving them that policy. Do we consider that our professional advisor is Andrew Maslick from Vanguard, or whoever we're using with JP
I think we need to
Morgan?
define that. I don't think,
I couldn't agree more. I think we're spinning our wheels here, is until we define what that means. I see a lot of shaking of heads of, if you've got the role, if you've got the lanes, what are you pursuing on financial advisor? My instinct is that we're starting to cross over again into, are we chasing rate of return, or are we chasing preservation of capital? From this chair, I'm saying, I think that ship has sailed. I thought that we were very clear about, we need to define the lanes, operate within them, and this phrase that's currently in there about financial advisor, I don't see the purpose. I'm more focused upon
You don't see the purpose of a professional advisor?
advisor to change the lanes. I mean, that's,
Well, no.
'Cause
I
we're
don't
gonna
know
get-
I don't know that we're asking anybody to change the lanes. Those have been defined by our investment policy, and the board has approved that. But we need them to manage the portfolio based on the criteria set
Right.
forth in the policy.
and there's where I crossed the line over to the RFQ qualifications for this subcommittee to flesh out. I would love to have the help. I can do it on my own, but I would think
No, I think
these guys would be able to have these presentations. And like I said, one of you brought it up, I don't think we're in any urgency to, move out of the Vanguard approved governing board division that we're operating under today. And if that's, if that's another month or so of these guys fleshing out, I know the holidays will probably, create some problems with that. But from this chair, I must be missing something, because I don't see where, if you've got the lanes, why you're looking at the phrase of advisor. That's not, from my chair, what we are wanting. We are wanting definement of how that financial production, and I think we struggled with the word earlier, but how they adhere to our lanes. What's their fee structure? What's their production for accounting, reporting? And that's where I'm seeing the word, and if I'm wrong, then somebody tell me, but it seems like we're shifting over to the advisor role, and that, to me, is going more into the instrument of rate of return, and that's not the guidance that I've been operating on for the last 30 days.
But the advisor is written in our bylaws, too.
yeah, if I may, right now, Vanguard, Andy is our professional investment advisor. And we go to him and we say, this is our policy, right? You have to procure instruments within our policy. So if we do put an RFQ out on the street, and company XYZ comes in, and that's the one we select, they are our professional investment advisor, and they're going to manage our reserves, or $28 million in reserves, based upon our lanes.
Yes, our criteria.
Right.
As written in our investment policy.
Correct.
That's what it
So
says.
we understand that, and once we put an RFQ out on the street and we get a company, then someone within that company will be our professional investment advisor based on our policy. So I think we have that covered.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Sue?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, I noticed you had your hand up.
It was, I think Lou did a pretty good job in summary there. I think we're getting tripped up in semantics a little bit, and I think we can get through that, obviously. If I may just take a stab at a bit of a summary here, the subcommittee, I think, has done a tremendous amount of work when it came to the fact that as we approach the upcoming budget season, What we faced last year was a little bit of a dip in our reserves, which caused a lot of stir when it came to what projects get approved and how we go about things. And we had some exposure that I think we just cleared up in 2/3 of the program that's on the screen here. So that's been accomplished, right? We've kind of understood the fact that equities are a bit of an exposure to us, and we want to preserve our reserve, and the percentages and whatnot have been adjusted, recommended to the board, and we're going in that direction. That's all good. So now it comes down to, I think, what really needs to be finalized here, and what was discussed, I think, in the last subcommittee meetings, at least that I attended to, was the fact that, where are we going when it comes to who's managing the funds, right? And so that's kind of where we're at. The last bit of these 3 sentences here, beginning with lastly, is really a management issue, and how we deal with changes in investments. Who's responsible for that? And as we sit here right now, Vanguard, I would not consider them our investment advisors because they're not really advising us anything. They're managing our funds. And so what we need to do is, when we create the RFQ, is to determine what kind of advice we need based on the funding that we have on the bonds and that kind of thing. And that would then be our professional advisor. So I just think we're 75% done here. And I just think with the last 3 paragraphs here, when we talk about who's approving what and what are we needing advice for, just needs to be spelled out in the RFQ, and I think we're home, as a bit of a summary.
Madam Chairman, the other thing is that this is something that's going to take some time. The house is not on fire, neither is our hair. We don't have to pull the trigger in the next 5 or 6 days. This is just something we need to take the time to make sure we are doing what is in the best interest of the association moving forward for many years. Thank you.
I agree. Mr. Young, save the best for last. What do you have to say?
I'm just going to bring you up to date on some history. Approximately 6 years ago, many of you weren't involved in the budget and finance. 6 years ago, we did have an investment advisory committee. When we established the funds going to Vanguard, we considered them, as Lou said, we considered them as the investment advisor to meet the policy. You don't have to agree with that, but that's what was done at the time. So we did have an investment advisor according to 5.5 whatever. They managed our money. They came to us, they reported to our investment advisory committee every quarter, and then the investment advisory committee made any changes to Vanguard. They confessed it back and forth, and that's how it was done. Does it need to be changed? That's up to you. I'm not trying to sit here and say it doesn't. It was 6 years ago. That's what happened, and that's where we were then. What do you want to do in going forward? Bill mentioned it, and my one fear is spending a lot more money on advisement for money that you're not going to make. And if you're investing money in CDs and bonds, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that you're not going to make any money, so you don't need to spend an awful lot to tell you how much to spend. Just be careful of that. That's my, thank you.
Jim, and I appreciate very much your comments, and I appreciate also the history you can give us. But if we are following our bylaws that requires a professional investment advisor, do you have any suggestions on the avenue we should take to achieve that?
Well, first of all, I'm not 100% sure, but I disagree with Bill on that. I think that Vanguard is providing that service, and therefore I think you are in compliance.
Well, I agree we are now, but if we are going to put out an RFQ and we're changing some of our investments, do you have any suggestions along those lines?
First of all, I wouldn't put one out.
Okay.
That's my opinion. I don't think you can afford a second or a third investment advisor. I think I think it's foolish. That's my first opinion.
Well, I guess I may be the only one thinking this way, but my thought is if we put out an RFQ, RFP, whatever you want to call it, we will no longer have Vanguard. This will be in lieu of Vanguard. So maybe others are not thinking the same way I am.
Well, it would be if you took it out of Vanguard, you're right.
Yeah. But do you have any suggestions, assuming then that we moved away from Vanguard? Do you have any suggestions on where to go on that? Because we don't need Vanguard and somebody else. I agree with that.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, if you're going to go away from Vanguard, and trust me, when we picked Vanguard 7 years ago, we interviewed 6 different companies. But it was, most of them were in the stocks and bonds field because we were moving that way. But we did interview 6 different people, and we picked Vanguard for several reasons. Number one, they were the least expensive. Most of them were charging 1%. These people are down to 1/4. And that was one reason. The second reason is they have a huge, huge following. They have tremendous, they have, what, 25, 30, 40 people investing in each one of the bonds or in investments. So they're changing them daily. So we picked them. Are they the best today? That's a choice that the committee makes.
We may
And
come back to them, who knows? I mean, I would think they would be
And I would say
involved
if you're
in-
going to continue, if you want to get rid of them and you're not happy with it, then you have to go out and do what you said.
Well, I would think that an RFQ should include Vanguard because we may want to keep them. I mean, I don't know why we would exclude them, but if the committee comes back and thinks that we need to go in maybe not a different direction, but explore possibilities, we'd probably want to see what they have to offer us.
There's nothing wrong with exploring. My big question is, what are you trying to accomplish? First of all, you're investing your money conservatively, then that's what you wanted to do, and that's fine. But if you're going to do that, you've already done it. Are you going to change it from one bond to another one? I don't see the advantage. You're going to make a 1.1% instead of 1.2. I don't know, you're not going to make any money anyway, so you've got to be careful about, at least in today's age. Is that going to change? I don't know, who knows? Could get worse. In fact, I'm not sure I'd invest any money in government security bonds. They go, oh, such a big debt today, I don't know that I'd want any, but anyway, that's just my opinion.
I appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, we've heard a lot of dialogue today, had some excellent input, and I appreciate everything that I've heard. I think probably at this point in time, I can just give a brief summary to the governing board. Most of them have heard everything today, but they can probably give the report better than I can at the workshop. But I think I'd like to just have the FI-12 subcommittee, which we will keep that name for right now, just continue on and look at the idea of this Reserve Investment Advisory Committee, and along with the idea that we will need to have some kind of professional investment advisor. Does that sound reasonable?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
as I understand, the new deliverables for the FI-12 would be to detail the investments within lanes. Pete, I think that is key to say within the 10% range, within the 30% range, within the 60% range, we would have details. No more than 20% in X, no more yada, yada, yada. FDICs have to be 249, et cetera. Once that is approved, then I believe you do the RFQ and include that in the RFQ. basically, what Jim said is what we're trying to do. We want to get those 6 firms in here, he mentioned 6, I don't know whether it's going to be 2, 4, 6, 10, and say, this is our policy, speak to us, because you're going to be our professional advisor now, right? But we've already developed the lanes and the percentages within the lanes. Obviously, there's a little flexibility in there, but as Jim indicated, in our current policy, there's not a heck of a lot of, there's not a heck of a lot one way or the other, right? But I think the flow would be, if I were going to develop a deliverable, would be first to come up with a detail, to detail the lanes, and then detail what we want in each of those lanes. Bring that back to the subcommittee. Once they agree that, yes, that's prudent, I think the next step then is to put that policy within the RFQ. Basically, what you're putting out on the street is, hey, listen, here's our policy, come in and talk to us if you're interested in our $28 million bucks. And you're going to get probably 4 big houses to come in. They're going to give you a spiel. And then once we get the spiel, we decide. So that's, I think, the direction. John?
I don't disagree with anything that Lou said, but I guess my viewpoint is probably a little different in that I think job one, and it becomes an iterative process to accomplish job one, is to try to define for us the role of financial advisor. I think there is not 100% clarity or consensus on what a financial advisor is for Sun City West. So to me, we're going to struggle until we figure that out. Because once that's figured out, and we maybe detail some of these lanes a little bit more tightly, we'll all have a better idea of the cost that we would have to pay to do that. I don't think we can put a dollar value on that. I'm very sensitive to Jim Young's earlier comments of paying more for less. And I think we really need to be very careful there. I think we could fall into a trap of layering upon layering cost on the community, and I don't think anybody wants to do that. So I'm very sensitive to his comments. I think we need to be guided by that. We need to be guided by comments that you as chair gave us a few minutes ago about defining that role. You talked about that. So I think, to me, that's job one.
When you were talking, Lou, about detailing the investments within the lanes, are you thinking get more detailed than what you've already put into this?
Yes. The answer is yes. So we have a policy. Now, within that policy, we're going to say that there's going to be Reserve Investment Advisory Committee. And that will be the actual procedures that we put in the RFQ. Actually, in my notes, John, I had defined 55531. And I think that can be within the procedures. We define once again, in our procedures, we would say the professional investment advisor's responsibilities are X, Y, and Z, right? To take our 10%, and this is what you're going to do, right? Take our 30%, and this is what you're going to do. So within the detailing of the investment within the lanes, we also define what we want our professional advisor to do. My goal, if sitting on this, is zero cost. As Terry said, either pay it up front, or as he uses the term haircut, you get a haircut on your final return. So one way or another, these people are in business to make money. But I don't mind paying, for example, if you look at Vanguard's 500 fund, their management fee is on 0.002 or something of that nature, right? They're getting paid, but they shouldn't get paid in addition to that. They shouldn't get paid when we tell them that we're going to move from bond fund A to bond fund B. Right? There should be no transaction fee. Right? So, I mean, that's really where I'm seeing when we get into the detail, this is what we tell the professional investment advisor. When these 6 companies come in and we say, we're gonna be buying, you know, and we're talking big numbers here, right? If you're talking, you know, $5 million on a 30, 60, 90-day policy, we're moving on day 91, the 30-day came due, we're gonna be moving $5 million. We don't wanna pay anything for it, right? You're just moving it from here to here.
Right.
Right? You're going to get your haircut or your fee somewhere on the back end, but you're not going to pay twice.
Well, another deliverable that I would see is some definition or framework for this Reserve Investment Advisory Committee, because I don't see this as a done deal. I see it as something that we might want to consider, but I think we need to know more about how that will look going forward. And as our president pointed out, what we set up today needs to be able to be operational 10, 15 years from today, going into perpetuity. And we have, you know, a wonderful set of skills and experience and knowledge right here, but we are not always going to have that. We want to have something that can live on its own and have the ability to deliver what the expectations are. So that's something else we need to consider. We can't frame it around the skills and the people we have at the moment. So I think that's something else that's going to need some work done on. I'm not opposed to the idea of one, but I think we need to be real careful how it's structured.
We will define the role of that committee.
So, and having gone through all this, like I said, I think that I can talk at the board workshop this week. I don't think we'll need one of you to be there unless you want to be there.
Unless it's a Trail Ridge, I won't make it.
Well, last I heard, we're not meeting at Trail Ridge, and I don't know what the tee time is, Lou, but it's probably on the 9th hole. Well, 19th hole, we might meet there, but
I don't think we're ready for prime time.
no, I don't think we are either. Although the not ready for primetime players did quite well through the years. Yeah. So I think we've kind of wrapped up a discussion here. Terry, have you been able to put any of this together to write minutes for us? I'm going to go around the committee one last time and see what comments they have to make. Lisa, I'm going to start with you.
First off, I want to say thank you to Bill down there for his comments on this, because I was kind of chomping at the bit to say exactly that, because that was where I was headed with that. And so thank you, Bill, for getting that out there. I greatly appreciate it. These guys have done an outstanding job with that subcommittee, and they were on that, right on just right on the precipice of that. And so thank you, you guys. I think we're just right there in that direction. And really, that's all I have to say.
Terry?
Just a big thank you to the committee, and I think this is going in the right direction. One of the things that I think is being done right is we're discussing it and then stopping to think about it and then go forward and not make a rash decision quickly or immediately.
Thank you. Lou?
I'm just typing up our next agenda for the subcommittee. Now, you know, I'm just in agreement with I love all the input, trying to put it down on paper, and then we'll start hitting it line by line, and hopefully bring you a deliverable that is acceptable.
Okay.
So no
And-
other comments.
And there's.
Oh,
there's-
Karen.
There's no deadline on this at the moment. I'm not
Right,
pushing you.
and
for
I
a-
think Karen's pushing us for a date.
Oh, I would say definitely we're in January with a deliverable, correct?
Okay, our next meeting is,
2 weeks from today, the 15th of December.
okay, so maybe, Karen, when do you need to know about our next meeting? Okay, so we can't do this Thursday. Is next Tuesday okay with John and Terry?
Well, it should say the 15th.
That's, yeah, 9, 10, whatever you can make. So tentatively, that would be the FI12 subcommittee. Okay.
Okay. Did you have any other comments? Are you?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
What's that?
Kathy?
On Tuesday? Yeah, 8. Oh, we'll talk after, we're good. I'm good, thank.
No, I think we just wait for the subcommittee to give us their literary magic back.
I like that term. That's good, literary magic. Now you know what you're shooting for, John. What are your comments here?
No additional grist for the mill.
And Terry, how about your haircuts today?
Yeah.
You got a new term for it.
Yeah, no, I'm good. Again, we already have, we've reduced our equities down to 10%, so you guys are all comfortable with that. We've kind of hammered out the lanes, so I think we're there. It's just a matter of, and again, my interpretation of professional investment advisor is what a Vanguard does. I think in the spirit of a trustee or a fiduciary responsibility or whatever, Vanguard is there to, yeah, you got 3 lanes, here, this fits in the lane. And they're a third party to kind of watch the money. You know, it's not somebody in Pete's office watching the money. You've got a third person there. That's, to me, that's their biggest responsibility, quite frankly, is there's a third party there watching your money and reporting the money back to Pete so he can do the accounting. That's what happens. Thanks.
Thank you. Do I have any other comments or questions from the audience that I have here in this room? And Katie, have we gotten any comments or questions from anyone? Okay. Sue?
Were you going to go back to FI 17? Were you going to go back?
Oh,
finish FI
thank
17?
you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm glad somebody knows what's going on this morning. Pete, yes, FI 17.
Correspondence was dated back in November 16th. Came in response to Kathy Peterson, rather lengthy on this, so I'll summarize it. Staff would like to remove paragraph 3.9 from the FI 17 policy. People seeing this are automatically going to, after their refund, even when it doesn't apply them, and asking for a hearing within the board to formally request. And his response was, I have no problem with the board removing 3.9. There are even more exemptions now than there were back in 2012 when I suggested this language be in the policy. Didn't know it was going to be a major problem. It does not need to be replaced. The board continues to have inherent authority to grant waivers, but really it should be used sparingly, if at all, given all the exceptions, exemptions. You are right, that is just inviting people to ask.
Okay, so you've heard the legal ruling on 3.9. Let's go around the committee and hear if anyone has any comments, yay or nay, removing 3.9 from this policy. Lou?
Before I give my opinion on that, what recourse does a resident of our community have?
George, can you respond to that?
I'm sorry, Pete, I was paying very close attention to hearing Lou. Lou, residents always have the ability to come before the governing board. What I think was the real issue with 3.9 was the idea of hardship, because we've had people come in, and not that I'm going to divulge somebody who's out there, but we have somebody come in and told us that they want their APF fee refunded. They didn't meet two of the three criteria. They were less than a year, different change on the deed, and they said, well, we're going to claim COVID as a hardship. And I asked them, I said, is this going along with the other 325 million people in America? So I think that there's a lot of idea. A resident always has the opportunity to come before the governing board. But what we're having is I think we're going to our 9th or 10th hearing about people who are saying, well, we don't want to pay the APF fee. We have found instances where we've had people change their deeds 3 or 4 times, and because of the REDS program, did I get that right, REDS? I always forget. Is that some of the residents and owner members and renters who are out there are getting caught into a net that where they changed the legal deed is what triggers us. And we're saying, I know we have exemptions for death, although I've always personally wanted a death exemption, but I don't think I can get that far on myself. But the idea is that there's an exemption for this, or who inherits the property, or all those things. But there's criteria that were put in. And right now, I think this is trying to clean this up. It was never brought up before that APF fees were going to be questioned by the governing board. And we, like it said there, we have with or without obligation to do so. If we act on one today, that does not mean we have to act on anything the same way tomorrow.
Okay, so you're saying especially what you're saying, there's enough recourse built into the policy that we don't need that.
Absolutely. And
Then I
again, and Lou, just to reiterate real quick, because I really don't want to belabor this more than it has to be. We've had situations where it's come up, and I've always told many of my subordinates when I worked, there's two questions you ask. There's do things right or do the right thing. Okay? We have an obligation to do things right, but there comes points where we are obligated to do the right thing, and I think that Debbie and Pete and their staff over there absolutely do, without a doubt, always try to make sure that they cover every basis, not a day out of this or a day out of that, or they do an immense amount of job before they will reject something.
Okay, then I'm okay with removing 3.9.
Harry?
I'm okay with removing the item. It just creates problems, it sounds like.
Lisa?
I'm okay with removing it.
Terry?
I'm okay. I work with the public too long. You give them that much room, they will beat you over the head with it. So, no, I would say unless you die or the house is gone before a year, you don't even ask for your money back. That's just, again, I come from that world that, wow, it just gets crazy. And I wouldn't want to be Debbie going, and again, once you let one in, and again, George, I get it, you want the power to be able to do something or whatever you think is right, but you just did it for that person. Are you going to do it for that person? It gets weird.
You just got Debbie as the president of your family.
Yeah,
club.
well, because
Terry-
I've worked in that world, and it's just, God, it gets crazy.
Terry, one of the questions we always put out there is life happens around us, and sometimes we have to take that into consideration. That's just me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Go, God, yeah. It just, yeah.
John?
Remove it.
Kathy?
We knew our financial obligation when we bought here, so I support removing it.
Thank you. So we have consensus to move policy FI 17, which I almost forgot about. Thank you again, Sue. Move that forward to the governing board. So, again, any more questions, comments? The agenda states that our next meeting is on December 16th. It's actually on December 15th, which is 2 weeks from today, Tuesday, 9 a.m. in this same room. So, hearing no other comments, questions, 9 a.m. in the social hall. Why, did you?
The meeting moved around because of availability. We're trying to make them all up done on the 15th.
It's at 9 o'clock, right here, on the 15th. Okay, hearing no other questions, comments, whatever, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all so much for your attention and your very educated and thoughtful input. I appreciate you.